Silence swallowed the courtroom. Not the kind of silence that comes with respect, but the kind that feels like oxygen has been ripped from the room. Every breath stopped. Detective Sergeant Silas Bullgrave, a name that had haunted Chicago's South Side for 2 decades, stood shaking. His fingers were locked tight around a service weapon, the barrel aimed straight at the forehead of Judge Marcus Thorne. For 20 years, Silas believed fear made him untouchable. Tonight, he believed he still was. He was wrong. What happened next didn't just stop a gunman. It cracked open a buried conspiracy and shook the justice system to its core. The silence didn't arrive gently. It crashed into the courtroom like a physical force, squeezing the air out of every chest in the room. No coughs, no whispers, no shuffling feet. Just the sound of a grown man's hands shaking around a loaded firearm. Detective Sergeant Silas Bullgrave, a name that had terrified Chicago's South Side for over 20 years, stood frozen in the center aisle. His knuckles were bone white, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. The muzzle of his service pistol was aimed directly at the head of Judge Marcus Thorne. For 2 decades, Silas had lived by a simple belief. Fear was power, and power meant immunity. In that moment, he still believed it. What he didn't understand, what he could never have imagined, was that this courtroom wasn't his hunting ground. It was his reckoning. Chicago rain had a way of revealing things. It didn't wash the streets clean, it polished the grime until it reflected the streetlights. To Silas, the city wasn't a community. It was a board, and he had been moving pieces across it for years. At 45, he was a relic of an older system, one that thrived on silence and rewarded brutality with promotions. Broad shoulders, thick neck, permanent scowl. His mustache twitched whenever he sensed fear, and fear had always followed him like a shadow. He didn't protect the streets. He owned them. That Tuesday night, he wasn't responding to a call. He was bored. He cruised the South Side near the University of Chicago, windows cracked, eyes scanning for someone who looked easy to dominate. Not a criminal, just a target. Then he saw the car, an aging Toyota Camry, clean, maintained, obediently stopping at a red light. The driver was young, black, wearing a hoodie. That was enough. Silas flicked on his lights. The siren chirped once, just enough to make a heart sink. Inside the Camry, Elijah Vance felt his chest tighten. 22 years old, medical student, late night at the library, dreams bigger than the city around him. He knew the stories. Everyone did. And he knew the name Bullgrave. He pulled over slowly, carefully, like his life depended on it. Because sometimes it did. Tail lights out, Silas said flatly, even though it wasn't. He leaned into the window, inhaling deeply, hoping, almost praying, for the scent of weed. All he found was old coffee, textbooks, and exhaustion. His disappointment hardened into irritation. Step out of the vehicle. Elijah tried to speak, to explain, to sound respectful. Silas didn't listen. The door was yanked open. Hands grabbed fabric. Rain-soaked pavement met Elijah's knees as accusations spilled from Silas's mouth. Resisting, aggression, attitude. Then came the ritual. A small plastic bag. White powder. Evidence saved for nights like this. Silas planted it smoothly, almost lovingly. Then he found it. The future collapsed in Elijah's eyes. "That's not mine," he whispered. Silas leaned in close, breath heavy with tobacco and certainty. "Who do you think they'll believe?" To Silas, it was just another report. Another ruined life filed away under paperwork and silence. But this one didn't disappear. It walked into a courtroom. The day of the trial, Silas felt untouchable. He always did. Judges nodded when he spoke. Prosecutors trusted his badge. Juries believed the uniform. Until Judge Marcus Thorne entered the room. He wasn't old. He wasn't tired. He didn't carry himself like a man waiting out his career. Thorne was tall, composed, deliberate. His movements were economical, controlled. He didn't fidget, didn't chatter, didn't smile. When his eyes met Silas's, something unfamiliar crept into Silas's chest. Not fear, recognition. The kind predators feel when they realize the room contains something more dangerous than them. Silas testified flawlessly. Every lie delivered with polish and confidence. He spoke of odors that didn't exist, behaviors that never happened, evidence that magically appeared. The jury leaned forward. They always did. Then Judge Thorne began asking questions. Not emotional ones. Not accusatory ones. Precise ones. Statistics. Patterns. Coincidences that appeared far too often to be accidents. Silas felt sweat gather beneath his collar. Then the judge mentioned the camera. A new one. High definition. Installed days before the arrest. The screen lit up, and the truth walked into the room. Clear footage. No ambiguity. Silas's hand dipping into his own pocket. The baggie. The plant. The lie. The silence returned. But this time, it was heavy. Crushing. Silas's world fractured. Authority slipping. Control evaporating. He panicked. A shove. A scream. A stolen gun. People dove for cover. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Everyone moved. Except Judge Thorne. He stood. Calm. Unblinking. "You're not the law," he said evenly. "You're just a criminal who wore it." The gun fired. Wood exploded. Screams echoed. And then, in a blink, Thorne moved. Not with rage. With precision. Bones snapped. Metal clattered. Silas hit the table, powerless, staring up at the man he had aimed to kill. "You have the right to remain silent," Thorne said quietly. "This would be a good time to use it." Later, behind closed doors, the truth finished what the courtroom started. This trial wasn't chance. It was an investigation. Silas wasn't just abusive. He was a piece of a larger machine. An enforcer protected by years of silence. And then came the final blow. 20 years earlier, Silas had killed an innocent man. Planted a weapon. Earned praise. That man was Marcus Thorne's father. The frightened boy who watched it happen. He had grown up. And he had waited. Silas lost everything. His badge. His freedom. His name. 60 years. No parole. In prison, he became what he once created. Small, forgotten, terrified. And Elijah Vance. He became a doctor. His future rebuilt with money born from the consequences of Silas's crimes. Silas believed fear made him powerful. But fear only builds empires that collapse the moment truth walks in. Justice didn't rush him. It waited. And when it finally arrived, it didn't need to shout. The rain kept falling, slow, steady, unforgiving. Each drop tapped against the roof of the Camry like a countdown Elijah never agreed to start. Silas parked just far enough back to stay in the shadows. He took his time stepping out, adjusting his belt, letting the silence stretch. Power lived in pauses. He knew that. Elijah watched him through the side mirror, measured every movement. Tall frame, confident walk, one hand resting casually near the holster, not because he needed it, because he wanted it noticed. The officer stopped just behind the driver's door, flashlight slicing through the dark interior. "Evening," Silas said at last. His voice was calm, almost bored. "You know why I pulled you over?" Elijah swallowed. His mouth was dry, but his voice stayed steady. "No, sir." Silas leaned in closer, the beam of light lingering too long on Elijah's face, then drifting down to his hands, still exactly where they were supposed to be. "You were drifting," Silas said. "Caught my eye. A lie." Elijah knew it. Silas knew it. But lies didn't need truth when they wore a badge. "I need to see your license and registration." Elijah moved slowly, narrating every motion like he'd been taught since he was old enough to understand danger. "My license is in my wallet. Registration's in the glove box." Silas nodded once, curt. Approval without warmth. As Elijah reached for his wallet, his mind raced. Not with guilt, but with calculation. How to stay calm. How not to look afraid. How not to give the moment anything it could twist against him. The rain soaked into his sleeves as he handed over the documents. Silas studied the name longer than necessary. Elijah Vance. The officer's jaw tightened just slightly. A flicker, quick, almost invisible, passed through his eyes. Not surprise. Recognition of opportunity. "You headed somewhere important tonight?" Silas asked. "Home," Elijah replied. "I've got class early." Silas hummed, unconvinced. He circled the car slowly, flashlight tracing the outline of the doors, the trunk, the back window, searching not for evidence, but for permission. When he returned, his tone had shifted. "Step out of the vehicle." Elijah's chest tightened. "Is there a reason, officer?" Silas's smile was thin. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Elijah complied. The cold hit him immediately, sharp and biting. Rain soaked through his hoodie as he stepped onto the pavement, hands visible, movements deliberate. Cars passed by in the distance. None slowed down. No witnesses. Just the way Silas liked it. As Elijah stood there, heart steady but heavy, one truth settled in his mind with terrifying clarity. This wasn't about a traffic stop anymore. Silas moved closer, invading the space Elijah had carefully kept open. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with cheap cologne as the officer lowered his voice, turning it almost conversational, dangerously so. "You seem nervous," Silas said. "That usually means people are hiding something." Elijah met his eyes for the first time, not with defiance, with control. "I'm standing in the rain being questioned for no reason," he replied evenly. "I think that's a normal reaction." For a brief moment, the rain was the only sound between them. Silas's smile faded, because calm was harder to break than fear, and he could already tell this man wasn't going to crack the way others did. Silas moved closer, invading the space Elijah had carefully kept open. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with cheap cologne as the officer lowered his voice, turning it almost conversational, dangerously so. "You seem nervous," Silas said. "That usually means people are hiding something." Elijah met his eyes for the first time, not with defiance, with control. "I'm standing in the rain being questioned for no reason," he replied evenly. "I think that's a normal reaction." For a brief moment, the rain was the only sound between them. Silas's smile faded, because calm was harder to break than fear, and he could already tell this man wasn't going to crack the way others did. Elijah swallowed. "I don't know what that would be." Silas straightened up slowly, stepping back from the window. The rain soaked into his uniform, darkening the fabric, but he didn't seem to notice. His mind was already moving to the next step. The escalation. "Step out of the car," Silas said. Elijah's heart sank, not because he was guilty, but because he knew what came next. He'd seen it before. On the news. In courtrooms. In whispered stories shared late at night between people who knew better than to be surprised anymore. "Officer," Elijah said carefully, "may I ask why?" Silas turned sharply. "You can ask questions later," he snapped. "Right now, you're stepping out of the vehicle." The tone had changed. The mask was slipping. Elijah complied. Slowly, deliberately. He opened the door and stepped into the cold rain, hands visible, palms open. He turned just enough to face the car, like he'd been taught, like survival training disguised as manners. The pavement was slick beneath his shoes. Silas moved in close, far closer than necessary, one hand pressing against Elijah's shoulder as he guided him toward the hood. "Hands on the car," Silas ordered. Elijah did as he was told. The rain soaked through his sleeves, water dripping down his fingers and pooling on the metal beneath his palms. His breathing stayed steady, but his mind was racing. "Stay calm. Don't react. Don't give him anything." Silas began the pat-down. Rough, aggressive, less about safety and more about dominance. His hands moved deliberately, lingering too long, pressing too hard. "Spread your legs," Silas said. Elijah obeyed. A passing car slowed for a moment, headlights illuminating the scene, then sped up again, disappearing into the night. No witnesses. Silas paused. Then suddenly, violently, he shoved Elijah forward. Elijah's chest slammed against the hood, knocking the air from his lungs. "Hey," Elijah started, but the word died in his throat as Silas twisted his arm behind his back. "Resisting," Silas shouted, loud enough for the empty street to hear. Elijah winced as pain shot through his shoulder. "I'm not resisting," he said through clenched teeth. Silas didn't respond. He forced Elijah down, pushing him to his knees, then to the pavement. Cold water soaked through Elijah's clothes as his cheek pressed against the asphalt. Silas's knee dug into his back. "Stop moving," Silas yelled. "I'm not moving." Elijah gasped. Handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, tight, intentionally too tight. Silas stood, breathing hard, scanning the empty street like an actor checking for an audience. Then he reached into his pocket. The insurance policy. A tiny plastic bag. White powder inside. Silas held it up between two fingers, shaking his head slowly like a disappointed parent. Well, he said. "What do we have here?" Elijah's stomach dropped. "That's not mine," Elijah said immediately. "You know that's not mine." Silas crouched down so their faces were level. Rain streaked down his face, mixing with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Funny thing about evidence," Silas whispered. "It doesn't need permission to exist." He placed the bag carefully on the wet pavement beside Elijah's knee, then picked it up again. "Planted. Discovered. Declared real. Possession," Silas said louder now, switching back to official tone. "Intent unknown." Elijah stared at the ground, fists clenched inside the cuffs. "This is illegal," he said. "You're ruining my life." Silas chuckled. "You should have thought about that before driving around with drugs." "I didn't," Elijah snapped. "You put that there." Silas stood, wiping rain from his face. "Say it louder," he said. "Maybe the street will testify for you." He leaned in one last time, voice low, venomous. "Bye-bye, future," Silas whispered. In that moment, Elijah understood something terrifying. This wasn't about drugs. This wasn't about a traffic stop. This wasn't even about him. It was about power, unchecked, unquestioned, and protected by silence. As Silas pulled him to his feet and guided him toward the patrol car, Elijah felt the weight of the lie settle in. A lie with a badge. A lie that could erase everything he'd built with a few strokes of a pen. The door slammed shut behind him, and as the engine started, Elijah stared through the rain-streaked window, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. If the truth didn't surface soon, this lie would become history. Silas had crushed hundreds of cases like this. Traffic stop, search, discovery, testimony. It was a rhythm he knew by heart. Judges rarely questioned him. Prosecutors leaned on his reports like scripture. His name carried weight, reputation polished by conviction numbers, not truth. This was supposed to be another easy win. But the moment Silas stepped into the courtroom, something felt wrong. The air was heavier, too quiet. No casual laughter from the prosecution table. No familiar nods from the bailiffs. Even the spectators, few as they were, sat straighter than usual, as if instinctively sensing that this case wasn't going to follow the usual script. Then Silas saw the judge. Judge Marcus Thorne. He wasn't old, wasn't tired, didn't shuffle papers or sigh through proceedings. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes alert, watching, not scanning the room the way most judges did, but focusing, studying, measuring. When Thorne looked at Silas, there was no hostility in his expression. No judgment, just assessment. And that unsettled Silas more than anger ever could. Silas took the stand with practiced ease. He adjusted his uniform, straightened his posture, and placed one hand on the Bible. His voice was steady when he swore the oath, strong, confident, unhesitating. The truth, after all, was optional. He described the traffic stop in perfect legal language. The broken tail light, the suspicious behavior, the odor consistent with narcotics. Each phrase was familiar, safe, repeatable. The prosecutor nodded along, pen scratching approving notes. Silas felt himself relax. This was home territory. But Judge Thorne didn't look down to write. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He simply listened. Every word. When Silas described the search, Thorne leaned forward slightly, not to hear better, but as if mentally reconstructing the scene. His eyes never left Silas's face. "And you found the substance where?" Thorne asked calmly. "On the ground near the suspect," Silas replied. After he exited the vehicle, Thorne nodded once. "And before that moment," he asked, "you had no visual confirmation of contraband?" "No, Your Honor." "And no body camera footage?" Silas paused. "Technical malfunction," he said smoothly. "Battery failure." The room shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but something tightened. Judge Thorne tilted his head slightly. "Interesting," he said. Just one word. No accusation. No raised voice. Yet Silas felt a flicker of irritation crawl up his spine. The defense attorney stood, predictably ineffective. A few routine questions. A half-hearted attempt to challenge the stop. Nothing Silas hadn't brushed aside dozens of times before. Then the defense rested. That should have been it. But instead, the defendant stood. The room stirred. Judge Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Vance," he said, voice even, "you wish to testify?" "Yes, Your Honor." Silas felt a brief surge of amusement. Defendants always thought they could save themselves with words. Always underestimated the power of a badge over a voice. Elijah walked to the stand slowly, calmly. No dramatics. He didn't look at Silas. Not once. That alone made Silas uneasy. "State your name for the record," the judge said. "Elijah Vance." "And your occupation?" Elijah hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then, "Federal contractor." Silas's jaw tightened. Judge Thorne leaned back slightly, eyes sharpening. "Proceed," he said. Elijah didn't rant, didn't accuse, didn't raise his voice. He described the stop plainly. His compliance, his hands, the rain, the shove, the cuffs. Then he paused. "Your Honor," Elijah said, "may I submit evidence?" The prosecutor frowned. Silas stiffened. What evidence? The judge asked. Elijah reached into his jacket. Silas's pulse spiked. Then, a badge. Not local. Not state. Gold. Federal. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I am Deputy U.S. Marshal Elijah Vance, he said quietly, assigned to an internal corruption task force. Silas's stomach dropped. Judge Thorne stood. The sound of his chair scraping back echoed like a gunshot. Bailiff, Thorne said coldly, lock the doors. Screens lit up. Video footage played, clear, undeniable. Silas's hand slipping the bag onto the pavement. His voice twisting the narrative. The timeline collapsing in real time. Silas stood frozen. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exposure. Judge Thorne's voice cut through the chaos. Calm, controlled, absolute. Officer Silas, he said, you will remain seated. Federal agents are en route. Silas finally understood. This trial wasn't about the defendant. It never was. It was about him. And for the first time in his career, the badge didn't protect him. It trapped him. Silas testified the way he always did. Calm, measured, confident. His voice never wavered as he described the stop, the search, the discovery. Each sentence flowed like muscle memory, perfected through years of repetition. He knew exactly when to pause, when to emphasize a word, when to look at the jury, and when to look away. To anyone listening casually, it sounded believable, professional, truthful. But Judge Thorne wasn't listening casually. He leaned forward, fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on Silas, not searching for emotion, but for patterns. When Silas finished his statement, the judge didn't respond immediately. Silence filled the room. Not awkward silence. Intentional silence. Then Judge Thorne spoke. Officer Silas, he said evenly, how many arrests have you made in the past 12 months? Silas blinked, surprised. Approximately 140, Your Honor. And how many of those involved traffic stops that resulted in narcotics charges? Silas hesitated, then answered. Most of them. Judge Thorne nodded slowly. And how many of those stops occurred within 3 blocks of 4th Street? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Silas's jaw tightened. I don't have that information. But I do, the judge replied. He reached for a folder and slid it across the bench. 83%, Thorne said calmly. Same street. Same justification. Same outcome. Silas felt the room shift. The prosecutor shifted in his chair. The jury leaned forward. Judge Thorne continued, his tone still controlled. Now, officer, do you recall a security camera being installed on the northwest corner of 4th and Delaney last month? Silas's mouth went dry. No, Your Honor. That's understandable, Thorne said. It wasn't a city camera. He pressed a button. The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen came alive. Clear footage appeared, steady, wide angle, impossible to dismiss. It showed the traffic stop from above. Silas's patrol car. The defendant standing compliant. Hands visible. Empty pavement. Then the moment froze. Judge Thorne's voice cut through the stillness. Play. The video resumed. The room watched as Silas turned slightly away from the defendant, his body blocking the view of his partner. His hand moved to his pocket. Then, slow, unmistakable, he dropped the bag onto the ground. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The footage zoomed in, frame by frame. No confusion, no obstruction, no doubt. Silas planted the evidence with his own hands. The judge let the video play again, and again. By the 3rd time, Silas couldn't look at the screen. The silence afterward was crushing. Judge Thorne stood. This court does not speculate, he said firmly. This court observes. He turned toward Silas. Your testimony was not inaccurate, Thorne continued. It was false. Bailiffs moved into position. The truth didn't need arguments anymore. It had spoken for itself. Silas panicked. Authority slipping. Control evaporating. He shoved a bailiff. Grabbed a gun. Chaos erupted. People screamed. Coward. But Judge Thorne didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't beg. He stepped forward. You're not the law, Thorne said calmly. You're just a criminal who wore it. A warning shot rang out. And then, in one fluid motion, Thorne disarmed him. Bones snapped. Gun flew. Silas was on the table, helpless. The predator was finished. Later, behind closed doors, Thorne explained everything. This wasn't coincidence. It was Operation Glass House, a DOJ investigation targeting corrupt police networks. Silas wasn't just abusive. He was an enforcer. And then came the truth that crushed him. 20 years earlier, Silas had murdered an innocent man, planted a weapon, earned a medal. That man was Marcus Thorne's father. The boy in the back seat that night was now the judge who destroyed him. Silas was convicted on dozens of charges: attempted murder, perjury, civil rights violations. 60 years. No parole. In prison, he became what he once created: powerless, feared, forgotten. And the boy he tried to destroy? Elijah Vance became a doctor, funded by a scholarship created from the settlement Silas caused. Silas thought fear made him a king, but fear only builds fragile empires. Judge Thorne didn't just win a case. He played a 20-year chess match. And checkmate didn't come with a gun. It came with truth.